Thanks everyone for showing up to our webinar, Recon's webinar. We're going to try and lay out for you guys how the recently legislated acts around cyber, due to come into effect in July, how they're going to impact business and its operations. My name's Kyle. I'm one of the principals here at Recon. I have a history in architecture, enterprise architecture, strategy, governance, and of course, cyber. Joined by my partner, Daniel, and I'll let Danny introduce himself.
Look, I'm just an old hat in cyber. I've been doing it for 20 or 25 years. I used to advise for the ASD on the ISM and the Essential 8. Back in the day, I've been involved in Symantec, Microsoft, and a number of other organizations on cyber practices, risk management practices across the board. I'm just an old hat, mate. That's pretty much it, yeah. But obviously, there's been these new changes that happened, and the ones we want to talk about today are really about the Cybersecurity Act 2024, the amendments that are happening to the Privacy Act, the SOCI Act, or the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act itself, and there's a security intelligence and other legislation amendment that's also come through as well. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what this actually really means. The Australian government has made sweeping changes to several laws and acts that impact our businesses. Yeah, there are changes to the Privacy Act requirements. Civil penalties applications are now tightened up to include the interference with privacy. Yeah. These are now not just applicable to external bodies and breaches itself, but also internal breaches in the environment. New Cybersecurity Act requirements around ransomware payment reporting, and there are now fines related to the non-disclosure of ransomware payments by the government as well. The Critical Infrastructure Act changes have added some additional requirements with regards to the storage and processing of data is now part of the primary asset if you are a SOCI-related entity itself. Kyle will talk a little bit later about the SOCI entity aspects behind that one further. In essence, the cost to business of these changes is increasing, and there is still more to come. All right. The biggest challenge to business today is, what is my risk? How do I understand my net position? As Kyle mentioned earlier, most of these will come into effect on the 1st of July, 2025. What is essential in the interim timeframe is us planning and enacting these changes before then, making sure the business is prepared and the staff that it relates to are informed. Just as a bit of FYI, this is really only the beginning. The government has outlined 3 ways of action, called horizons, as you can see down the bottom there, for scaling out the security of the nation in the future. We are only at Horizon 1. Some of the aspects in future waves that need to be that are going to be incorporated are going to be active third-party reviews of critical data sets, defined data classification models for all data within the business, updates to data retention requirements both at governmental level and at the business level, and they're talking about the secure and responsible use of AI in government. So really, Kyle, what does this all mean, right?
Yeah. Basically, the government's worried about our national cyber posture. Historically, business has been business. Business has just done business, right? They've taken the approach of what's the minimum we can get away with? What's the minimum we have to do? And the reason they've done that is because there's been no reason for them to do otherwise. There's been very little in the way of regulation, accountability, or consequences. With the number of attacks and ransom demands, and we have to think about that, ransom demands, we'll come back to that later, they just keep happening, they just keep going up. You only have to open a newspaper or any of the thousands of blog sites every day to see what's going on. So the government's come up with a carrot and stick approach to trying to push business to take its cyber hygiene a bit more seriously. It's a really big carrot and a really tiny stick, but it's a step in the right direction. So what they've done is they've put in place an obligatory reporting framework around most possible adverse cyber situations with some accountability attached to it. So first up if your business does more than 3 mil turnover in a year and you're carrying on business in Australia, you're affected by this legislation. Basically meaning you're going to need to take your cybersecurity a lot more seriously. We've got security, compliance, and accountability there. Each act has its own references to measures a company has to undertake to protect itself, its customers, and their data, customer and company data alike, right? For board directors acting on these new requirements, it's going to increase their burden or the burden to the business. A director's role, as we all know, is essentially to nurture and look after the health of the business. One way of doing that is minimizing risk. I mean, as parents, we're always on the lookout for our kids, right? Trying to foresee where things go wrong for them, where they might hurt themselves, get hurt. Director's role really isn't that much different just for companies. Now, with this new accountability framework, boards are not going to be able to put their head in the sand any longer. They're going to have, I mean, boards understand risk, right? So understanding cyber risk, even if it's only periodic, is going to allow the business to determine the actions they need to undertake. The board determines a direction. Senior management can outline activities and actions, which can pass it down to their staff, and everyone acts with minimal recourse so long as we all understand the risk together. We're all on the same page. We've got proactivity and resilience, and just all this just simply means being proactive and building in safeguards. More importantly, being able to show it. So you're going to have and define a comprehensive cyber strategy, build a culture of awareness in the business, cyber resilience, build a culture of resilience in the business, ensure you have a clear cyber security incident plan. And then reporting is now your friend. Privacy, the Privacy Act, the SOCI Act, the Cybersecurity Acts, they all have their own reporting requirements, but we'll get into that a bit later. So how is it affected? How does it affect us, right? So all the effects of this can be seen as either positive or negative, right? Increased regulatory compliance can be seen as a negative. It goes without saying, right? The whole point of these things is to force companies to increase their preparedness and resilience. The increased compliance requirements, they're going to require you to have more detailed documentation. You're going to need to have a better, more well-defined data governance structure. Things like awareness and training. These should obviously already be inherent in your active business management plans, but with this increased compliance now, they're just coming to the fore. And if something does happen to you, you could probably expect a greater level of scrutiny for a while afterwards here as well. There's new reporting requirements. As I said on the last slide, each of the acts has their own reporting requirements. For the Cybersecurity Act, there's ransomware payment reporting. Only if you make a payment or if someone makes a payment on your behalf. But there's an obligation there. The SOCI Act, the Critical Infrastructure Act, any cyber incident needs to be reported. And as Danny alluded to earlier, if you are a service provider providing processing and or storage of mission critical data to a critical infrastructure entity, you yourself are considered critical infrastructure and you need to abide by the SOCI Act. Right?
Does that mean things like Azure and AWS?
Azure, AWS, if
any
you're providing
cloud-based service type stuff that you
absolutely. Yep. And I mean there are different definitions, but I mean it's if it's mission critical data or data, I want to say critical to their mission, but I'm just repeating myself. Mission critical data has an actual definition. Yeah. I think it's 20,000 customers.
That's right.
Is the limit.
Yep.
Yeah. But anything that is critical to the operation of the critical infrastructure entity, and you're considered CI yourself, you have to abide by the SOCI Act. Yeah. The Privacy Act, with the notifiable data breach scheme. So if you even only suspect that you've been breached and someone's personal information is going to be leaked, then you're expected to notify the OAIC, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. There's a new entity, the National Cybersecurity Coordinator, or NCSC, right? Now, their role's twofold, basically. They're there to collect information from you about any incident you might experience, so they can build a national pool of cyber incident knowledge and process on how to remediate, handle, deal with, etc. Right? I said their role's twofold. The other thing is that if you experience an incident and you ask, these guys with their pooled knowledge are there to assist you and get you through it.
Yeah.
Right? So making it easier to get assistance and collaborate, that's got to be a positive.
Yeah.
There's going to be increased business participation. So as I said earlier, the board, they're not going to be able to stick their head in the sands anymore. They're going to need to get their head around cyber and its associated risks. Well, what this means for line staff like yourselves is you're going to get the visibility you've been pushing for a long time. Now, whether that's a positive or negative, that's up to you and your circumstances. Okay, I can't help you there. But either way, so long as you can justify yourselves sufficiently, you're going to have ever so slightly less blowback when you're asking for money. And then we finally come to the biggest plus for yourself, your company, and your board. Assuming you do the reporting when you need to, your liability is reduced to nigh on minimal. Any information, I'll touch on this again later, but any information you report is inadmissible in criminal or civil proceedings against you or your organization. And as I say, we'll get into that later. The important thing here is reducing your liability and enhancing your brand. Boards, they've been managing risk, mostly financial risk, for a long time now. But cyber risk is so usually poorly defined and misunderstood. And the boards are now going to need clarity. And the easiest way for you to present this to them and give them that clarity is to start looking at active risk management. Thanks, Danny.
That's right.
So active risk management is about understanding the risks and concerns around the infrastructure, the IT and OT infrastructure for that matter, at a cyber level in an ongoing fashion. I mentioned if you do more than 3 mil turnover annually, you're included in these amendments and changes. And those amendments and changes include, in the Privacy Act, taking reasonable steps to protect personal information, including technical and organizational measures. They're the salient words there. The new Privacy Principle 11.3 that's been added to the Privacy Principles, reasonable steps to protect personal information from misuse, interference, loss, unauthorized access, modification or disclosure with technical and organizational measures. Now, determining what's reasonable, I argue, inherently involves a risk assessment and a plan to mitigate those risks. Different types of information and business contexts require different levels of security. Financial risk is different to cyber risk. A documented risk management plan is going to be your most effective way to demonstrate, not only to the board, but anyone asking, how reasonable were those steps you undertook. The notifiable data breach scheme in the Privacy Act, requires you to notify the OAIC if you even suspect a breach. Again, a solid risk management plan, including incident response procedures, is going to be crucial to managing and handling your breaches if they occur. I mean, the whole point of this is to stop from happening, right?
Yep.
But demonstrating a proactive response or approach, if you will, to risk management can also help mitigate, your reputational damage and any regulatory penalties that someone might see fit to throw at you. Privacy Act's focus on reasonable steps, and because it covers everything. I mean, the Privacy Act isn't in isolation to the SOCI Act or the Cyber Act. Its focus on reasonable steps, coupled with the NDB scheme, the notifiable data breach scheme, really suggests that you want to be conducting ongoing regular risk assessments. You want to be implementing appropriate security measures. And if you have a documented plan for managing that risk, you're halfway there. A risk management plan should be an active, living, breathing document, right? And an active, living, breathing cyber risk management plan, that's going to become your blueprint for how you manage your cyber and your IT or your OT within the business. I mean, it's there on screen, right? Most people know a proper management plan includes all those things listed. Who has access to what? What devices have access to what? What's your insider threat? What's your outsider threat? What's your attack surface? And what are those critical systems that, if you lost them in an incident, would stop the business generating revenue? If something were to happen, you need to be able to understand at a glance the impact, the flow-on effects, and how you're going to respond to that, and report it as well, obviously, right? The idea here is we're hoping for the best and planning for the worst. So why do we want a cyber risk management plan? Daniel.
Oh, well, I think you've pretty much outlined a lot of it already, mate. Yeah, all right.
Sorry for stealing.
I know, mate, but that's all right. Yeah, but the key thing is that's what the plan entails and the technicalities behind that one from there. But a plan itself is not just that itself. You saw earlier about the understanding business risk, understanding business awareness across the board. The plan is not just a set of outlines around the cyber practice. It's also about a mechanism to make others aware of the activities and actions being performed or need to be performed. Kyle mentioned it earlier. Many senior managers and directors understand that cyber is a cost to the business, but often don't see the benefits related to the cost impact to the business. Yeah, and that's a really small distinction, but it is a big thing in their world. Yeah. A plan is a way to garner support for the activities being undertaken and provide clear deliverables for the business. Raising an awareness of these new requirements is something you're going to have to do in respect to the situation. It also has the ability to be able to show what you are actually doing every single day, which in turn protects your job. Yeah. Assist in defining your actions in the near and longer term future. If you've got a cyber maturity program that you're already undertaking at this point in time, yeah, you're actually adding to that whole thing and saying, well, this is where the risks are. This is why the cyber maturity exists itself. In addition, it determines who is responsible, including the senior management or directors around cyber itself. Most directors are very difficult to hold and count, but the new regulations are actually holding them more accountable to that one, so they're going to ask more questions. Okay. In addition, if something does go wrong, what do? Yeah, determines what you need to do, how you need to go about it. We talk a little bit about reporting, when to report. Yeah. But there's also additional bits and pieces. If you're actually after more investment in cyber in the future, you're actually outlining what those investments might need to be. Yeah. And you're defining a value of cyber to the business. The whole idea behind this one on the cyber risk management plan is to get away from this cost element. Okay. You have no idea how many times I've been asked, Dan, can you come in and see my board and tell them why it's important that they need to invest into it? Yeah. All right. You should be focusing on presenting an active business benefit related to these things. It's all about increased operational resilience. It's all about protecting the revenue. It's all about increasing the data-driven intelligence. Now, that last one is a massive area. We talked about data governance earlier itself, Kyle. Yeah? Yep. All right. Data-driven intelligence, if you can predict what's actually going to happen based on historical elements behind that one from there, you've got a data-driven culture that's going to help sales, it's going to help marketing, it's going to help a whole bunch of different areas across the board. And it's just all part of your cyber risk management plan.
Our data-driven culture is explicitly not an AI-driven culture.
No. Look, inherently, there are going to be aspects to the plan that are going to relate to cost. Yeah. Yet when you look at it, presenting it in a risk management plan, you're focusing on the benefits to change the perspective, not the related costs. Yeah. And as it says right at the bottom of the cell, because you're going to know when and what to do when something goes wrong, you're going to know when to report. So, Kyle, you sort of touched on these things, and I've told to touch on a few of them myself. But do you want to go through what's inherently required in the plan?
Sure. So look, I don't want to teach grandma to suck eggs here.
Yeah.
Any serious professional knows the basics of what's required in a risk management plan. Who has access to what? Do you have access control policies in place? Does that person need that access? Do you implement RBAC, role-based access control? Do you do regular access reviews? Time, people, they move on, right? is the need today the same as it was yesterday? Network segmentation, actually. I'm not saying you need to go full zero trust, but proper network segmentation, even at a role level, can help mitigate traversal and discovery breaches. What measures and controls do you have in place? Are they effective? Do they work? How do you know? Your technical controls, your firewalls, routers, IDS, they're all up to date. Do you put DLP in place? Physical controls, you probably don't need to worry about so much, but you do need to consider them. Staff training, now this is my favorite one. Depending on how you look at it, staff training is either your first line of defense or your last line of defense. Take your pick, I don't mind. But making your staff aware of what to look out for, what they should and shouldn't do, and when they should and should not do it is half the game, right? If you get there, you're halfway there. And personally, staff training is your biggest bang for buck security control measure you can put in place, full stop. Right? Do you have appropriate change control processes in place? How do you know they work? What happens if something does occur, right? Have you done regular testing and audits? Have you built that muscle memory? Do you have that information? Have you got monitoring and logging? This is a favorite. I don't know how many times Danny and I have heard someone say to us,
Oh, God, we could talk to them about that.
Yeah, we're fine, mate. We've got an XDR system in place. No, sorry. An XDR system will take care of you for the last 5, 10, maybe minutes.
Yep, pretty close.
But if the thing took place a week ago, 3 hours ago, your XDR system's not going to help. I'm sorry. That's something for another day's discussion. I'm going to stop there because otherwise Daniel's going to jump in and rant for an hour.
Oh, yeah. Don't get me started. Yep.
Incident response drills, your tabletop exercises, your walkthroughs, your DR and your failover exercises. Have you built that muscle memory for your staff? Because if you haven't, they don't have it. When something happens, you're just going to cost yourself time and everything else along with it, right? Who do you talk to? When do you talk to them? Is the third-party service provider was breached? Do you need your lawyer? Do you need forensics? What's your communication strategy, staff and the public and the authorities? Is it all documented somewhere? When do you need to report? All this stuff should be in your cyber risk management plan. So basically, you need to be able to prove that you haven't intentionally or recklessly, remember those words, put someone's data at risk.
And I really want to talk about this one itself because I get the phone calls from the lawyers, yeah, when something does actually occur, all right? Often what happens is you might report an incident to your board or your senior management. First thing they do is they go to their lawyer, whether it be internal or external, and they go, often the board's first question is, do we trust what IT actually has at this point in time to actually know whether this is a breach or not? Okay. Are you fully aware of that risk? Are you fully aware of the ramifications of that risk? And if the lawyer turns around and doesn't think the board director has a good understanding of that one itself, the lawyer is going to turn around and say, call this person. Yeah. All right. And they're going to ask someone like me to third party verify that one across the board. Okay. So, they're going to make that phone call to a lawyer irrespective of the situation itself. Okay. The question is, are they comfortable and confident in your risk assessment structure behind that one as well? Which actually goes into the next big thing. Yeah. All right. And in essence, you need to quantify your risks. Okay. Now, when we start talking about quantification of risk itself, risk is in essence risk is really hard to quantify. It's a hypothetical scenario in which something may or may not occur. Look, the picture on the slide itself is just a dashboard. Yeah. It's just an example of a dashboard to show what could go to a board or to your senior management team. Yeah. Unfortunately, I found over many years of doing this one itself, there is no common metric that for everyone to use to quantify risk. Each business is unique, has different data storage mechanisms, has different uses of that data, and even different controls across the board. Yeah. However, there are a set of common questions to assist you in quantifying that risk. And they fall into 3 primary categories itself. And those 3 primary categories are, what is the value of your data and the people? What are the controls that manage access to that data and people? And what are the risk scenarios that the business may be impacted by? Okay. Now, if I take the first one, what is the value of data and people? What is the value of a customer record? Is it different between a supplier, a client, a personnel internally? Yeah. What is the value of a user account? And that could be a salesperson, an HR person, a marketing person. And if we talk about from an IT-based perspective, things like a privileged user who has significantly higher access to different things in the systems, the value of that user account is significantly more than, let's say, a typical salesperson. Yeah. Where is the data stored? Is it stored within a controlled environment in our control, or is it managed by a third party? If it's by a third party or in the cloud, what are our contractual obligations with the cloud provider? Are we in charge of that data? Does the cloud provider manage that data? Does the third party provider manage that data? What are the measures they put in place around that one as well? And what is the cost of the internal intellectual property itself? All right. I've got a couple of logos on the right-hand side. We all know what those breaches are all about. They're all publicly available, publicly aware. But in every single one of those instances itself, and I can tell you, I was asked this personally by 3 out of the 4 listed there itself. They did not actually understand the value of their data and their people before the incident actually occurred. All right. Now, because they've been impacted by it, they actually understand that value significantly more. All right. There's a really interesting one that I didn't touch on, which is the NVIDIA one itself. Okay. This is actually really interesting because the intellectual property aspect around the NVIDIA breach was inadvertent itself. The core developers of the NVIDIA technology itself were using ChatGPT to basically clean up code, fix up code, enhance code that they'd already developed in that circumstance. What they didn't realize was that it was actually leaking it out to ChatGPT. So if anybody actually asked any questions, they could actually grab the blueprints and the information around how NVIDIA built their chipsets and chip functions and some of the AI models across the board itself. All right. It's a really interesting case of, our own intellectual property has been compromised because we haven't understand where our data is and all that stuff from there, which leads me into that second category I was talking about. What are the controls to manage access to data and people? The typical ones that everybody asks about is, do you have MFA in place? Do you have role-based access in place? Do you limit the use and access to data? Okay. Do you have security standards for your servers, endpoints, and mobiles? Do you classify data stored within the business? That NVIDIA thing could have been really removed completely if they turn around and said, no, any core coding information with regards to it can't be used on something like ChatGPT, or limited the access to use to ChatGPT if this information is included. Yeah. All those controls are going to be doing is turning around and going, here's my value of my data, here's my risks. Because my risks are there, my controls are there, I'm now reducing the actual risk associated with it from there. You then want to apply the risk scenarios that the business may be impacted by. Okay. Now, as you can see on the little screen here, I've got 20 different risk scenarios, but they're actually listed into 4 risk categories. Yeah. This is where you have to lean on the historical incidents and events that the business had been impacted by. You could leverage your MSP or MSSP that might be monitoring this type of stuff for you in that circumstance. Or I personally think looking at your centralized logging to assess what potential risks actually might be there. All right. Obviously, the government is actually recommending, and I'm not going to say no to this one itself, is advocating the use of security risk assessments to understand exactly what risks you're impacted by, to identify these risk scenarios, to determine these risk categories. Once you've got all those bits and pieces all sorted out, you've actually got all the relevant elements to quantify your risk. Yeah. You can then place a value around each one of these risk categories or risk scenarios, a dollar value that makes it clear and understood by the business what the impact might be if this occurs. The result of that one is the business will drive investment from this. Yeah. It will raise the awareness of what your current posture is. It will also inform what steps need to be taken to achieve a greater level itself. Now, I am going to tell you a cautionary note from my side of things around quantifying risk itself. All right. If you undervalue the risk, you won't get the investment needed to be able to increase your security maturity. If you overvalue your risk, you will be asked to report on it more frequently. Quantifying your risk to the business is about understanding the real costs related to mitigating both in the short and long term. And to be fair with you, a lot of these top cyber risks on this dashboard itself will be persistent across a longer period of time because it takes time to address these things as well. As I said earlier, each business is unique. There is no cookie cutter or templated approach to assessing and validating these findings. All businesses have different data structures, different data approaches, and different ways of managing cyber risk. Security assessments are specific around the business will validate all these different sets. There are plenty of methodologies and frameworks for testing. I want to actually really recount a story. I won't tell you who it is, but in 2013, I was commissioned by one of the big four accounting firms to write up a template for applying cyber risk management to large business that could be leveraged in their new cyber division. All right, you can sort of might be able to work out who that is based on the year. But I warned them at that time that a templated approach without consideration of business operation was going to fail. Yet they asked me to do it anyway. And you know what? I was commissioned. They paid for it. I provided them the template, warned them of the actual things itself, and you know, they went out and they still use it today. I saw that template being used by another accounting firm literally 6 months ago as their assessment guidebook for best practices of risk quantification. I asked the person at the end of it, are you actually agreeing with the recommendations? Are people actually agreeing with the recommendations, I should say? The answer was no. It's not precise enough in that circumstance. When presenting any risk plan, your board and senior management are going to ask you questions. Yeah. Often these questions are going to be testing you to see whether you actually understand the subject in play. And if you are answering those questions really well, they're really going to start considering what you say. Okay. Some of those things are going to be testing questions. Some of those are going to be, what do I need to do next? I'll put them up on the screen itself as the common ones that are actually asked. Is this really our current state? Why isn't it better? Have you come to this conclusion yourself, or have you got somebody else to verify this is actually the case? Yeah. And they're all qualification questions as to, is this true or not? Yeah. Once that actually passes, they're going to go, what investments do we need to do? Yeah. Is the investment going to be persistent or short term? All right. I was actually asked this one, would have been a year ago, Kyle, if you remember correctly. Yeah. All right. How long is this investment going to be? And I turned around and said, you're going to have to spend $2 million for the next 5 years to achieve your goal. All right. The board agreed with me. They put the budget aside, they put the investment aside, and the cyber guy was sitting there just going, I've never had that much funding in my whole life. Yeah. All right. They are happy to invest as long as they understand the substantiated risk. All right. If you prepare for these questions in advance and don't wait for them to ask, you will get what you need. But please make sure these risks are real. All right. Recon, we are practitioners of real world cyber operations. That's what we do. I'm advocating the use of risk assessments because it's probably one of the best ways to go about it from that. But let's get into the meat and glory of what this actually means for business today. Why and when to report. Kyle, tell me.
Sure. Thanks, mate. So look, it was mentioned earlier, right? The SOCI Act and the Cybersecurity Act both have provisions in them for any information you report whilst experiencing an incident to be inadmissible for use in penalties against you or your organization, both criminal and civil, right? Criminal proceedings, any Commonwealth, state, or territory, including common law proceedings, any tribunal, Commonwealth, state, or territory, there's limited use permission for departments within the government. They can pass it around and contribute to the collective knowledge, yeah, if you will. But basically, it can't be used against you. Now, there's two carve-outs there. One I've written on the screen there. if you present them with false or misleading information and documentation, then they're going to come after you. Another one is if you've asked for assistance and you then impede a Commonwealth employee in the carrying out of their duties or obligations, then they might be wanting to come after you there as well, right? The exception to this here is the Privacy Act. We mentioned the notifiable data breach scheme, right? But tying in with both the Cybersecurity Act and the SOCI Act, there's actually an amendment to the Intelligence Services Act that states that the definition of a cybersecurity incident is the discovery of unintended or unexpected vulnerabilities in a computer data or program that, if exploited, would result in a cyber incident within the meaning of the SOCI Act. So if you discover a vulnerability, according to the Intelligence Services Act, in your computer, that's a cybersecurity incident. In your program or in your systems, that's a cybersecurity incident. The notifiable data breach scheme, you have to report with the Privacy Act. The Privacy Act also has something called an interference with privacy, or interference of privacy, sorry. And then there's a serious interference of privacy. And a court's going to determine that. There's a bunch of things they use to determine that. But here's the thing. Whether you report or not, if you can be shown to have acted intentionally reckless with someone's personal information, the penalties for a serious interference of privacy within the Privacy Act for a company are up to $50 million. Now, there's a greater than aspect to that, talking about the value of the benefit your company derived for not having done what you should have, or 30% of the adjusted turnover of your company whilst you weren't doing what you should have been doing, or $50 million, whichever is the greater, right? Either way, and those last two are generally, only affect major multinational enterprises, but $50 million is no small chump change, right?
Yeah.
If you report and you have your documented risk management plan, active documented risk management plan, regularly reviewed, regularly assessed, you're going to be able to go a long way to proving that you've taken those reasonable steps that the Privacy Act requires you to take, right? And certainly, you're going to reduce your risk to the company of lawsuits and liability, and it's certainly not going to hurt you in the reputation stakes either, right? By reporting, you might just lose less trust with your customers and stakeholders. So SOCI Act, again, the same thing, yeah?
So Cole, quickly on the notified data breach scheme, there's a big question mark with regards to this interference with privacy, okay? It's a new addition. It has a pretty big impact potentially as well. It's sort of, one of the things we talked about between Kyle and myself is, okay, does this build out a whistleblowing mentality for consumers in the marketplace, all right? Because a consumer can report a notified data breach scheme with regards to a company as well, okay? It's not just the company that can do it, it's actually the individual who can do it as well. If they have a concern, they can raise it. They can
if someone does that,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Danny. If someone does that and you're found to not know about it, or worse, found to already have known about it and not said anything,
then they're going to throw the book at you. Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. So this whistleblower mentality around the Privacy Act and this interference with privacy is a big concern. Okay. Now, the SOCI Act and the ransomware payment side of things on the Cybersecurity Act, you have an ease of being able to manage that one via risk management plan. For the Privacy Act, this whistleblowing mentality is one of the difficult things to actually deal with. Yeah, because you have to understand how your data is being used, who has access to it, all that kind of stuff, obviously from there.
Absolutely.
And that's a really tough one to think about because data is everywhere nowadays. Yeah, all right. They are going to turn around and say, have you taken reasonable steps? Even if you're whistleblowing against it itself, have you taken reasonable steps? The first thing they're going to ask for, Kyle, is why.
Right there on screen, documentation.
Documentation. If you have a plan, if you have a set of controls, if you have a risk management structure behind that one from there, they're going to go reasonable steps. Yeah.
Yep.
Right?
I think we're up to 43 odd minutes at the moment, so we only scheduled 45. I think we're good.
My apologies.
No, it's all good, mate. It's all good. That's so.
Look, passionate about it. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. So let's give them the closing spiel, Danny.
Very cool. Look, if you are concerned, questioned, or can't quantify those things yourself in any way, shape, or form, or you just don't know what you don't know in that circumstance. We are a bunch of cybersecurity nerds. Okay, we do this for big business, large, highly compliant industries, energy sector, telecommunications, legal, media and entertainment industry itself. And we are very focused around the high compliance industry set. So we pretty much know what they have to deal with every single day. Our ethos is around our belief in proactive threat anticipation and structured risk management. All right. If you have any questions, if you're unsure, we are an ACSE network partner, obviously. Yeah, as you can see on the screen. Please feel free to reach out. You can always contact me or Kyle via LinkedIn. You can also email us at info@recontech.com.au itself, and one of the guys will direct you to some of our team. But please feel free to reach out, ask any questions. We're always happy to help because we're all about building out the maturity and being proactive around risk management across the board.
Absolutely. And with that, we'd like to open it up to the
audience, obviously, but I'm happy to leave it open for a little bit longer, mate. I think
please make us look good. Pepper us with questions.
Yeah. Are there any questions, guys? Just whack them in chat if you can.
Yeah, or shove your hand up and we'll. Were we that good? Did we explain it that well?
Well, given the fact it's 12:45 and there's no question, so I'll give it another minute, mate.
Yep. No? Anyone? Feeling a bit like a shag on a rock here.
You are, mate. Yeah. You did. I didn't hear what you had on earlier, by the way. Yeah.
Hang on. There's a Q&A here. Where we go? Sorry. Will the recording be made available, Jason? Yeah. Look.
Of course, man.
We can do that. I'm sure.
We'll send it out to you. We'll put it up. We actually have a YouTube page itself. We'll put the recording up for you guys. Obviously, you've seen all the information accordingly from that one. There will be a transcript. I think the Zoom does a transcriber thing itself. Give us a couple of days and we'll send out the link to everybody that wants to come along.
All right. Anyone else? With increasing data. Okay, so Bishel's coming. With increasing data breaches, how can we ideally quantify risk assessment to senior management in dollar values?
Ooh. All right. So the increasing data breach is basically, so quantifying a risk is very difficult. You've got to understand how much data you've got involved in your organization, how many different controls you have to managing that data. All right. It is really about data-driven cultures, not about the security measures you have in place. All right. The value of your data is what you need to determine. All right.
Yeah.
All right. It's not actually with regards to the controls you have in place. The controls you have in place reduce the potential risk of that value being impacted. Okay? So if you take a high, medium, and low approach, high chance, medium chance, or low chance of that actually occurring itself is a good way of doing it. The value is still actually the same. Yeah.
The value, but the value we need to stress, Danny, the value is the value of the data to the business and its continuing operation and function.
That's
and
correct.
well-being.
Yeah. And look, I've seen some people turn around and a $10 million organization turnover itself, value their business, their value at $50 million worth of data. Yeah. All right. I've seen a $100 million organization value their data at $10 million, which I think is ridiculous. Yeah. It's sort of, the answer is you've got to think, if I was to lose that data today, how much revenue would you lose? Yeah. It's the best way to think about it. All right.
And what would it cost me to get it back?
Well, and if I had to rebuild that all over again,
Yeah.
how much is it going to cost? That's correct. Yeah. And that's not an IT thing. That's a reputational thing. That's all that kind of stuff from there. Like I didn't go into the Vodafone thing itself, but Vodafone got hacked. Was it 2018, 2017, 2018, then got done again in 2022 as well. Yeah. In 2017, 2018, people don't realize it. They lost 20% of their customer base, 20% of their mobile network customer base. Yeah. That in its own right, just from a hack, the confidence in the marketplace was so low that people just walked away. They went to Telstra, they went to Optus. Yeah.
All right. And the same thing happened to Optus too, right?
Well, that's right. Yeah.
We don't know what their customer base was, but let's assume that 20% of their customer base is 200,000 or let's say 500,000 people. There's 20% of their customer.
There's actually a little bit more than that one, mate. But that's all right.
At let's average it out at $50 a month.
Yeah.
So $50 a month is $600 a year times 500,000 people. That's a chunk of change.
That's a chunk of change. Yeah. And are they going to get them back? How much effort is it going to take to come that back? Yeah.
So we've got another question here.
Okay.
Is it lose or loose data, Alan? Lose data, I think is what you mean.
Yeah. Corrupted data.
So what if the data was corrupted by a breach? What if you no longer trust your collected data?
So this is where I turn around and talk about centralized logging, yeah, and talk about data management across the board, yeah. This is a topic I could talk for hours on.
Yeah, steady on, chump.
And you're actually relating to something really interesting about that one from there. A lot of people talk about the Medibank thing itself and how the breach was actually a lot earlier than everybody realized it really was. Yeah, they waited for the ransomware attack to actually occur till after their data retention structures or DR backups had been rotated out. Yeah, corrupted data is something. Yeah, I'm always a big believer in two-tiered backup strategies. Yeah, you should have short-term backup strategies and you should have long-term backup strategies. Long-term backup strategies should be a lot longer retention time frame and should be separated from short-term backup strategies across the board. Most big critical infrastructure organizations do that one at this point in time. Yeah. You've heard of the old-fashioned ways where people still use things like the Secure Mountain tape storage and stuff like that.
Iron Mountain, they call it.
Yeah. Iron Mountain. Sorry, thank you. I was trying to remember the name of the damn place. Iron Mountain storage. That's there about minimizing the corruption of data in that circumstance itself. The integrity of data should be always constantly checked. And this is where things like centralized logging, centralized management, all that kind of stuff comes into consideration. If you've got that visibility, you'll start seeing where it corrupts. Yeah. You'll start seeing where the variations actually do occur, how it's accessed, what's been accessed, what's been changed. If you see changes in how data has been used in that circumstance itself, your centralized logging, your centralized monitoring should actually have that entailed. Yeah.
There's also the old 1, 2, 3 backup strategy, right?
We can talk about that
For every data set, there should be 2 copies in 3 different locations.
Yeah. Well, I know that. Yeah. That's a bit of an old school mentality, but it does.
But it works.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Alan?
Yep.
Cool. Thanks, mate.
Cool.
Are there any other questions we might have? Oh, I don't.
Here we go. Does the compliance requirement for your company's direct business-to-business engagements also extend to vendor partner entities not legally registered in Australia?
Yes.
Well, if it's carried on in Australia, yes. If it occurs outside Australia, then no.
So we talked about the data processing side of things earlier itself. All right. If you, let's say, a critical infrastructure asset is presenting information to a third-party system and that is being processed, the act and the ransom aspects behind that one from there and the incident management side, reporting side of things is applicable to the party that actually is processing the data, whether it be here in Australia or otherwise. Yeah. typically, the government is actually, well, I think I told you about Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3 in that circumstance itself. Sovereignty is something that's becoming more and more prevalent across the board. In fact, you're finding that a lot of the government institutions and government agencies are now requiring sovereignty here in Australia, all right, irrespective of the situation, all right. That is going to become more and more prevalent as these Horizon 2, Horizon 3 comes out. I think I mentioned about data governance structure itself. That sovereignty is going to be incorporated as part of that data governance mandate. Does that answer your question? Yep. No questions. Cool.
Okay.
Guys, I think we've gone a little bit over time, but I think the questions have been pretty good. Yeah.
Yep.
Look, as I said, we are available. You've got our details. You've seen us on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out, ask any questions you might have. Obviously, ping us on info@recontech.com.au. I actually might put that on the last slide for me. There we go. info@recontech.com.au. You can always email them that. You can always call the number. You can always go through the website and raise a query via that one as well. I encourage you, if you're unsure, ask. Okay? We're always happy to help. All right?
And on that note, thank you one and all for attending.
Appreciate it, guys.
Have a good afternoon.
Thanks.